I would say one of our favorite brands, and one brand that really did a great job of kind of using the local aspect to enhance their story, was a company out of San Francisco called Schwoods. And they make wood and stone sunglasses. And a lot of their ethos was, sustainable, green, etc. And they were, which is very representative of the Northwest, and they were able to take it and actually make it actionable, put it into their product. All the wood is harvested within the U.S. as well as the stone, excuse me, not Dwayne Johnson, and what's that? Or Alcatraz, precisely. So they really did a great job of both living up to it and really being true to that concept of sustainable, and it did in a way kind of come out with the local aspect as well because of where they're positioned. Another company that I love is based out of Brooklyn, Mullein and Sparrow, which I think really does represent, I touched upon it earlier, and you might be able to talk about this as well, but there seems to be in the Brooklyn Renaissance a harkening back to an older time, especially kind of the jazz age. I always feel it. I don't know if everyone's familiar with a lot of the bars and restaurants in the neighborhood, but they are the borough, but they also have that feel. And Mullein and Sparrow really captured that kind of old time essence and what really the Renaissance in Brooklyn has been about. It's incredibly unique. And very representative of the borough and the neighborhood. So I think both of those brands have done a great job of using local to enhance their products.
What immediately came to mind for me is someone who actually doesn't do any brand promotion, so to speak, the way we would normally traditionally consider. There's no advertising, there's no real getting out there and being incredibly present in the marketplace. And the brand is Brine, pickle company, and the owner's also a good friend of mine, Seamus Jones, and his success has been built on the pure quality of his product, and that is one of the things that I'm really I admire and I look for in any of the products that I carry, is that passion for quality, that it's not just about putting the label of Brooklyn or locally sourced or sustainable or any of those things that you are seeing as all the buzzwords out there in the market today, but it's really truly about quality and adhering to that quality. So for example, Brooklyn Brine, he doesn't advertise. He's making it in ways that I think is just absolutely astronomical. He actually has a real factory in Brooklyn. He just sent 13,000 pickles to South Africa. And it's all small batch production being made in a factory with about 15 people. And then he just recently opened the Pickle Shack, which I highly recommend every single one of you go and eat in this restaurant. It is, as they say, vegetable forward, but what that really means is it is a vegetarian restaurant, but they don't market themselves that way, and they only have Dogfish Head beer on tap. You can get other beers in bottles, but Dogfish Head is the only one on tap. But at Brooklyn Brine, at the Pickle Shack. So, but what I find really fascinating about his brand is that, like I said, there is no real. He hasn't spent a dime on marketing. His website is atrocious. I make fun of him all the time. If you want to buy directly from him, you have to buy a case of pickles. But he's managed to just grow in 4 years beyond anyone's wildest dreams when it comes to artisanal food in Brooklyn, because he's putting out an incredible quality product.
I think if I weren't making everything in New York, I wouldn't be able to tell the story of how these garments were coming to be. I think for a startup, for a designer who wants to, be ethical about the way that you're making your clothing, showing the process and really featuring your partners, your factories, your pattern makers, that's an asset. It puts faces to the product. It builds on your story. Whereas if you're making things overseas, there's a degree of separation that a startup can afford and doesn't really, give any sort of emotion, I guess, to the story you're telling.
Brands are starting to come back because it's getting, not only is it getting more expensive, but it's also the logistics of having a design team here, then sending it over there, then having to pay for it to come back, the quality not being great, having to send it back over to, to fix the quality issues, having it come back. it's getting to be a logistical headache, a nightmare, and the costs are rising. So I think the manufacturing will come back, to the States, and I think brands will be able to scale.
As far as scalability and being concerned about that, it definitely is a concern for me, especially considering all of the products that I'm selling are made here in Brooklyn. Manufacturing in Brooklyn is very cost prohibitive, especially when it comes to growth and expansion and finding space. So this is where I've started kind of wearing another hat, which surprised me. I didn't know I would be doing this, where I'm now actively advocating for, on a kind of more civic and political basis, for manufacturers in Brooklyn. As I mentioned, I worked closely with the Chamber of Commerce to establish the Brooklyn Made certification program, which will be very much like a LEED certification with different levels based on how much you're making in Brooklyn. But also, any opportunity I have, meeting with local politicians and people who can make a difference in helping to keep manufacturers here. I feel like that's part of my responsibility with what I'm doing, isn't just having a brick and mortar and selling the product, but also doing the work that I can to keep those products manufactured here in New York. So whether it's, meeting with, going down to DC and doing some lobbying on the Hill, or going up to Albany. I've done that, and I'm continuing to do that because I think it is really that important to provide the kind of incentives that you're seeing. Austin, for instance, are flying manufacturers out there and saying, we want you to manufacture here. Here are the incentives we can give you. So it's more than just, I'm running a business. I'm also kind of in this new space that I didn't anticipate.
Would you ever considering, like, if you felt like you tapped out of Brooklyn choices or options or brands, would you ever consider expanding to Made in NYC, or would that ruin your brand? Would that ruin your brand? Okay. Or like Queens.
It's your brand. It's Brooklyn. Now, would that same model be interesting for Chicago or?
A very good friend of mine just opened Los Angeles County store at the end of April, and it's the same model as my business. She actually was born and raised in Brooklyn, which is kind of funny, but it's happening. I've met with people who are want to do the same thing in Chicago, who want to do the same thing in DC. Because the reality is, just because pickles are made here doesn't mean they should have to be sent to South Africa to be purchased. People here should be able to support the fact that pickles are made here and stop buying Del Monte.